UK Crime Book Club. I'm here with James Ellson, and we are going to, once I get my hair out of my eye, we're going to be discussing your books and the research, your unusual research that's gone into the books for the settings. We've got a lot to talk about, and I'm going to be asking you about your day-to-day life on the small holding as well, and there's loads to talk about. So say hello, show off the book covers, and let's get cracking.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Here they are. So the first one was Trail, came out a couple of years ago. A missing person inquiry set in Nepal. And the new one, Cold Dawn, hot off the press, came out a couple of months ago. Sees Rick Castle, DCI Rick Castle, head back to Nepal on unfinished business. Don't want to give too many spoilers on that one.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. As we were just talking about before, we are going to try and keep it as vague as possible, which is hard. I mean, let's come here to talk about your books, but let's not talk about the books. How do we?
Yeah, gonna have to say a little bit.
Gonna have to talk a bit. Yeah, definitely. So first, tell us about DCI Castle, and thank you, Caroline. Good evening.
So he's a Manchester DCI. He's been in the job about 10 years, and as with most detectives, he's got quite a lot going on in his head. His father's got dementia. He gets quite keen on an analyst in the police station called Maggie. She's in a wheelchair, and how and why she's in a wheelchair is one of the threads that runs through both books. He is a beekeeper. They say write what you know, so I took that bit from my own life. I think one of the things that marks him out in terms of the genre is that he uses explicitly uses the detective method. So this is the SIO method taught to every senior investigating officer in the country. And when he, like all other senior detectives, when he starts a new investigation, he will ask himself the standard 4 questions. What do I know? What are my hypotheses for what happened? What do I need to know? And where can I find out? And it's those 4 questions that he explicitly turns to throughout points in the book, and that's what drives his investigation and what drives all investigations nationwide. And I've never seen that in another book. So that's marks him out. He's a beekeeper and a Manchester detective.
And you were a Manchester-based detective for a while.
I was, yes. I was in the police 15 years, 10 years down in London, and then myself and my wife moved up to the Peak District. So I transferred to Greater Manchester. I worked at Stockport and then finished as a DI at Moss Side. Really, Moss Side finished me. That was about 10 years ago, and I've been picking up the pieces and writing pretty much ever since.
Which is a good start.
Did you freeze me?
You're back. Okay, you were frozen on my screen. Was I frozen on yours?
Yes, sorry about that.
Oh, so one of us was frozen. I'm not sure which one was actually frozen then, if we were both frozen for each other. So just go back to, you did 15 years in the police, and you did 10 years in London and then 5 years in Manchester. And that's when you cut off for me.
Right, yes. So myself and my wife moved up to the Peak District, and I transferred to GMP, started at Stockport, and then finished as a DI at Moss Side. Moss Side finished me. That was about 10 years ago. We then moved to a small holding, and I've been picking up the pieces and ever since. And when we moved to a small holding, I started writing.
Was it different? It must have been different policing in different areas. Were there different issues in different places?
Um, I think the issues are all pretty similar.
Okay.
I mean, London has some fairly interesting areas. I worked at Paddington and Peckham, Walworth. Um, so going up to Manchester, wasn't so different. Yeah, there are quite a lot of gangs in Manchester, but there are quite a lot of gangs in London.
Mm.
I think what is different, is totally different, is the systems to police it. So,
Okay.
all the computer databases are different. Yes, the police national database is national, but that's about the only thing. So, having to learn all these new systems takes a while, and that's the difficult thing. And I mean, we're kind of blessed and cursed at the same time in this country, in that we've got 43 different police services, and each one pretty much has their own computer system, their own intelligence databases, and getting the services to talk to each other is really tricky. So if you do transfer, it is like being kind of going down about 3 years at school. It all starts again, really.
We've got quite a few hellos as well. So hello Julie, and hello Leslie, hello Donna. We've already said hello to Kaz, who has tagged and pinned so everyone can find us. She pins us to the top of the group so that people know where to go looking for us, which is really helpful.
Right.
How many books are you planning in this? Did you say it's going to be a trilogy?
Well, in my head, I've kind of
Have you got
penciled at
more?
least 10 books.
Wow.
So that would be the plan. I'm working on the third one at the moment. Well, it's kind of at the fine touches stage. That's working title A Cold Summer. I've actually drafted the next one, called Gunshot. But the first three are in what I would call the Nepal trilogy. So they are a trilogy, and the series will continue after that. But the first three have threads and a theme, running through them.
Okay, I think I can see where the third one might be going. So
Yeah,
that's we won't talk about that. We won't talk about that at all. But does that mean that book 4 it's not going to be set in Nepal?
that's right. Yeah, so book four will be solely in the UK. In fact, book three is also in the UK, solely. It's so should we talk about the Nepal thing?
Yes,
Um,
please.
so the Nepal thing. Well, I mean, I just need to rewind a bit. So when I left the police, I was in kind of no man's land for a bit,
Mm.
and having had absolutely no time in my life up to that point, um, I'd my kind of annual leave and stuff was spent climbing, but certainly, the police is a very busy career. But suddenly, I had all the time in the world, and I didn't really know what I was going to do, and it
Yeah.
literally happened overnight. Um, so I started by writing a diary to try and understand what had happened and to try and move me forward. And that diary became a memoir. I spent a year writing it, um, and the memoir was called From Cop to Coppicer. And I sent that memoir to 5 agents in London, and two of them really liked it. And I went to meet both of them, and one said, "Yeah, we'll go with this." And he then spent 6 months trying to find a publisher. Had quite a lot of good feedback. Quercus said, they liked my writing, but they were concerned how many books I was going to sell. Um, so the agents said, "Look, we're going to park that for the time being. Why don't you write a crime thriller?" And I thought, well, really enjoyed the writing. It really fitted in with working on the small holding, um, and so I thought, yeah, I'll have a go at that. So I got out that trusty envelope and wrote down on the back of it everything I knew about, which turned out to be three things: the police, obviously, Nepal because I'd done a lot of climbing and mountaineering out there, and beekeeping because I kept bees. Drew a few lines and started off, and out came the trail. So the Nepal was, so when I was trying to think about, where am I going to set this book? Everybody likes to have a kind of, well, I thought anyway. I didn't know so much about it then. I thought everybody likes a unique place to set their book. Peter James sets his books down in Brighton, and we've got um, what's his name? James
I
Lee
told
Bell.
you this is what happens. You start
Yeah,
trying to think, and your
James
brain
Lee Bell
goes.
sets his books in Louisiana. Kind of massive sense of place. And so I was thinking, well, I know Nepal really well. Don't know any other crime fiction set there. Why don't I set the books there, or set my book there? I know it really well because I've been out there 5 or 6 times. Went on a research expedition when I was a student, and then I've been out there trekking and climbing. So I knew it really well. I had a lot of the images in my head. I had loads of photographs, and I'm a massive fan of the country. It's got some of what I would say is the best walking on the planet. When you go into the foothills, there are no roads, and the local people to get about and to move all their stuff, literally the kitchen sink, they walk and they carry it. So the Sherpas carry 50 kilos, that's their standard load, and a double load, which some of them take because they get double money for that, that's 100 kilos. These are enormous, enormous loads. They are the HGVs of the foothills. So I knew all that, and I thought, that would be a good thing to do. So I wrote the trail in Nepal, where it starts off in Manchester and then goes out to Nepal and spends the rest of the book there. When I came to pitching that book a couple of years later, it totally backfired on me, that decision. So of the agents who came back to me, at least half of them said no, simply on the fact that it was not set in the UK or the US.
So anybody who's currently writing a book, pay attention.
Yeah. The big advice was nobody wants to read stuff set in Nepal, so stick it in the UK or the US. I've got to say that people who've read the book will disagree.
I really like the Nepal sections. I think it adds so much to the story. So
yeah, good.
I can understand maybe from a marketing point of view, I suppose, but it certainly wouldn't have put me off wanting to publish it based on where it was set.
Yeah, I mean, writing is writing. It's pace and tension are the same wherever you put them. They're either there or they're not there. So yeah.
So back to Nepal. How long were you there for, and how much of your experience has gone into it? Because I'm assuming, although you must have had some artistic license with the story, everything else, it must be based on reality, things that you've experienced.
Yeah. I mean, for example, there's a scene in the trail where a cow is being butchered, and the meat divvied up between the villages, and
It's not the most pleasant scene to read, is it? But it reads as a very realistic thing. You can imagine that happening.
Yeah, no, I actually I witnessed that, and it is, it's fascinating to see it, and obviously you only have to turn the clock back, I don't know, 100 years in this country, it would be happening in our villages.
Yeah.
Probably more recently than that, in fact, and nothing is wasted. And people were literally walking around the streets with great bloody pieces of meat. So that's just to take one example.
I will say that this is not a scene where anything bad happens to the cow. This is a cow that has died and is not being wasted. So this isn't a grisly murder of a cow.
Yeah,
This is
I mean, from a religious point of view, they're not meant to. Certainly, the Buddhists, obviously not meant to kill any animals, and a bit similar to India, they have a fairly sacred role. So this is commented on in the book by Russell Weatherbeater, who's the Nepal liaison for Rick. He's a mountaineer, and he says yes. He says something along the lines of, this cow had an accident. I mean, they do slaughter their animals to eat, but they don't kind of explicitly say so.
we've got hello from Paul Dean. So hello, Paul, and from Mills. Mills says, "Gosh, that's nuts. Can you ever imagine? Can you imagine if every single book ever published was only set in the UK or US?" Which is true.
Yeah, absolutely. So good. Well, I'm glad that was a potential supporter.
Well, that's the thing. It was a really interesting place to read about, and the way it's described is beautiful but real. You can kind of see what goes on there, how people live there. You've frozen on my screen again. This is going to be really fun. Oh, there we go. You're moving again.
Right.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So for the books that are set in the UK, is that why book 3, book 4 potentially are set in the UK? Is it kind of taking advice on board from publishers, or is that just the natural progression for Rick because that's where he's based and for this story?
Yeah. The kind of setting it in the UK, the US thing has always been at the back of my mind. But yeah, I mean, you're never going to have a 10-book detective series with a British detective, 10 books set in Nepal. It's not realistic. So, it seemed to me that I could get away with 2 books set in Nepal. I mean, because Rick's just well, certainly he starts the series just as a DI at South Manchester. So, he's not a special DI. The reason he gets tasked with this missing, so the trail is a missing person inquiry. Chap goes missing on a trekking expedition in the foothills of Everest. His name's Calix Coniston, and Calix Coniston lives in Manchester. So as happens, he's cited as missing by his parents. That's given to the local police to investigate, to Rick, and because Calix's father is well, he's well known. He's a brigadier in the Sherpas. Sorry, in the Gurkhas, not the Sherpas. Bit of a slip. He's a brigadier in the Gurkhas and had won a medal in the Falklands War. And because of that, he knows the chief superintendent, who wants this missing person inquiry to be looked in pronto. So the rules are slightly not followed, but Rick is assigned and heads out soon enough to Nepal to look for him. And that's exactly what British police will do. I was almost sent to Pakistan in quite similar circumstances on a missing person inquiry when I was in the job, and that gave me the initial spark for this particular idea.
That is something that I wondered. Was that creative license, or would that feasibly happen?
Absolutely. Yeah, British police officers go around the world looking for people who are lost. I mean, it's unusual in this case in that, he's a young man, and young men tend to, go AWOL every now and then. In this case, he's on a organised trekking expedition. So it's unusual. Nothing's particularly straightforward about this one. Um, and then there's more of kind of, what I know in that I've been on trekking expeditions in Nepal, and so I'm familiar with how a trekking expedition works. This one is heading up to Mount Mera, which is in fact a trekking expedition I've been on. It's a very, very similar route it's the same route for 90% of it as Everest Base Camp. So a lot of people in the UK, relatively, have done that trek. So it's ideal for them because it covers the same ground. And I use some of the place names, not all of them. I make some of them up, but some of them are the same.
What about the extremes in temperature along that track? Do they vary at different times of the year, the same as they're quite extreme in the scenes where the tent's freezing overnight and there's icicles and a puddle that freezes and then defrosts, but then there's also at the same time they can be quite hot through the day and cold at night. Seems like very uncomfortable temperatures, extremes of both.
Yeah, during the day it's actually really pleasant. It's not hot to the point of being uncomfortable, but they get they have seasons like we do, and certainly.
Yeah, I didn't word that well. I'm glad you knew what I meant because I didn't word that well. Of course, they have seasons.
But the climbing seasons are generally in their summer months, and their spring and summer. There's the kind of the window in May where all the Everest climbers go and climb it because that gives kind of stable weather. But it's still obviously very, very cold at Everest Base Camp. So, but the trekking season tends to be similar, and the days as you get higher up into the foothills, the days do get more extreme. It is cold and very cold at night, well under freezing, and there may be snow on the ground, certainly up by a base camp. Although with climate change, this is all changing a bit. But during the day, it's really nice. Can be really, really nice, and the sun comes out, and you get these bright, bright blue skies. Perfect. And you just wear sun cream and stuff. And so, in fact, this gave me the title for the second book, Cold Dawn.
Okay.
So, cold dawns are absolutely characteristic of Nepal, and you get these brilliant scenes where, so it is very cold at night, and then the sun comes up, and you get these fantastic sunrises with the kind of the glow of the sun coming up. But everybody's really cold during the night, and all the Sherpas. If you're at a place at a camp with Sherpas and porters, they're even colder because they haven't quite got gear of the Westerners. So what happens is they're very aware of the sun coming up, and there tends to be a grouping on the largest rock nearby, the first rock that's going to get the sun, and a bit as if they were cold-blooded. Everybody stands on this rock and waits till the sun hits them. It's a fantastic sight. So Cold Dawn is characteristic of the area. But as well, I think as a title, I thought it was quite good because the Cold Dawn suggests something a bit bittersweet. Dawn is often a positive thing, but it's a cold dawn, so maybe it's not so positive. And I like to think that suggests about, is Rick going to get his man, or is he not? Who knows?
I'm looking forward to finding out because, as I said, I've read the first one. I've not finished the second one, so I'm intrigued to see where it goes. We've got good evening from Malcolm Hollingtrate. Good evening, lovely Malcolm. And so let's talk about Calix's story. So obviously you've got DCI Rick Castle, who is your police guy, and then Calix has gone missing in Nepal. Somebody has called in a favour to Robbo, who is Rick's boss, which is Brigadier Coniston, and he isn't. It's not that he doesn't take it seriously at first, but he thinks maybe Mum's worrying a bit too much at first. You know, this is a young lad who's gone off on his own, won this holiday of a lifetime, gone off on his own. He's going to be away for a month. Probably wants to just get away from his parents, and that's what Rick's thinking. You know, this is the first time he's been out on his own. But there is something pricking at the back of his mind at the same time, something that he doesn't think there's a problem, but this doesn't sit right with him. And then we've got Calix. Obviously, we meet him fairly soon after that and see him meet up with other people on the trail and the people that are running the walks. And we learn a bit about Calix. He's an interesting character.
Yeah, yeah, he's a bit of a loner.
He has some unusual things about him. I don't
Yeah,
know
I
how
mean,
much to say.
no, I think I think we can talk about it. So he really likes animals, and he's very good with animals. But his hobby is taxidermy. So he really knows his animals, and he's got an attic room at his house, and he's got a lot of stuffed animals in there, birds particularly, but also kind of small rodents and that. And so going forward, you see him do that kind of thing. Um, he's good with his hands. He makes a snare and catches a mouse in um, one of the trekking kind of bedrooms that he stays in. But the whole time, as a reader, we're not sure kind of what he's up to really, and um, so yeah, he's it's I don't want to say too much. It's he's an interesting guy, and um, Rick gets to know him pretty well in the end.
He does get to know him quite well, and we're never quite sure just how far Calix's interest in animals goes. I mean, he there's an accident, and he taxidermies the neighbour's cat as kind of a gift to them. But it's kind of left hanging in the air about how this accident came to be. There's kind of always this question mark over him.
That's right, and I mean, I think um, it's those question marks kind of persist, and hopefully, make people wonder what is going on. And some of so yeah, it's not all um, kind of black and white about him.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's an investigation. Rick is finding out as he goes along.
How difficult would an investigation be from the other side of the world? I mean, they've got sat phones, and Rick's getting, Robbo's ringing him, Maggie's ringing him. He's got Kate with him, who's a fellow officer. He's, coordinating that level of search and all of this mystery across different continents. That can't be an easy thing to do, let alone write about and plan out.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's two things. Um, I mean, just operating in those places, if all you're doing is walking up the mountain, that's difficult enough in itself. But yeah, if you're investigating a missing person inquiry, there's an awful lot going on, and you need good people, a really good team, and you need good communications as well, and that's one of the problems that goes wrong. So there isn't a mobile phone network all the way up the trail. So they had to start using sat phones. Sat phones are kind of like miracles unless there's cloud cover, and then they don't work, and then you've got nothing. So from a kind of a writing point of view, you can just use that to your advantage the whole time. You know, if you want them to communicate, get rid of the clouds, and if you don't want them to communicate, bring those clouds back. So you know, it's quite difficult. You know, if you're in the UK, you can always have communication. So
Yeah, there's only so many mobile phones you can have die right at that moment when you're in the
yeah,
UK writing things.
yeah. So you need to be aware of that. But you know, in some ways, I suppose it's got a bit of you know, kind of locked room kind of crime thriller about it, because you know you can't go in all directions and do everything. You're on the trail. There are only a certain amount of people there, and they've only got a certain amount of communication. So I've never actually really thought about it thought like that.
It's
But
used very
yeah,
cleverly. It didn't feel
um,
contrived. It felt like it was
yeah,
naturally flowed with the rest of the weather pattern that you'd used. It wasn't just, it
mm.
was absolutely glorious and Rick's chatting away on this sat phone and then a cloud comes in just at that moment. That was handled really well. So whether you were thinking about it, you know, whether that was at the front of your mind or subconsciously, you have managed that really well. It didn't feel like it was just kind of thrown in for effect. It fitted with the whole weather pattern of the time.
Well, that's great, because I mean, at the end of the day, you want everything to work for the story, and you know, the plot unraveling.
Malcolm's written shaving brush. So there is a scene where, and I did want to ask if this is how it would really happen. Somebody who shows Calix how to, they sneak him a bit of cooking oil, and he uses the cooking oil with a very blunt by this point razor to shave. Is that feasible? Obviously I have never shaved. I've never taught anyone to shave. So oil with a bit of water and a blunt razor sounds really painful and awful to me. But he's determined to keep shaving, to keep taking care of himself as best he can.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible to shave without anything. Just get that razor out and drag it down your down
Oh,
your skin.
that
Um,
no, that made me
uh,
wince a little bit. Just the
yeah,
thought of
yeah.
it.
No, it's better if your face is a bit warm. I could probably have a very good shave right now.
One of the things we were going to talk about was why you decided to write and then your path into writing and into publication itself.
Sorry, why I started?
What made you start to write and then your path
Oh,
to publication and
yeah. So,
yeah.
um, well, so I wrote the memoir from cop to coppicer. So that was about. So when I left the police, you know, I wrote this memoir. Almost got that published, and but didn't. And the agent said, "Why didn't you write a crime thriller?" So I wrote The Trail, um, and then the agent didn't like it.
You said
So
about the country that it was set in, Nepal, being
yeah, I don't know. He just didn't really, you know, didn't go with him. So I tried a lot of other agents, and then well, I thought, sod 'em, I'll write another one. So I wrote the sequel to The Trail, which was called something different at the time. Um, and then I thought I'll just forget getting it published. So I wrote a third one. So I've done all this writing, but after about 5 years, I had my office was full of paperwork, and I thought, no, I'm gonna really try and get this published. So I went on an Arvin course. If people aren't familiar with them, they're residential writing weeks at 4 centres around the UK. That was in 2016, and unbelievably, that course was led by Bernadine Evaristo. So before she was the kind of global mega star that she is now, but she led that course. She was brilliant, and it was a great week. And the advice that I had from that was twofold. One, I need my peers to read my stuff. So nobody had really read my books up to that point. Um, my mum had read them and she liked them, but pretty much no one else. So I need to get a lot of other people reading them and get feedback from them. And somebody suggested may have been Bernadine, that I do a MA in creative writing. So I thought that was a very good idea. And when I came back, I signed up for an MA at Manchester Met, 3-year course, which was absolutely extraordinary. And for me, my writing, it went from kind of non-league to Champions League, non-league to World Cup. How about that? So yeah, my writing totally transformed in 3 years. I was lucky enough to be tutored by Joe Stretch, who won the Somerset Morn with the adult. Lovely little book. If anybody wants another book recommendation, he was absolutely brilliant. So during that time, I rewrote every single word of the trail. And when I finished the course, I was lucky enough to land a publishing deal. So yeah, that's how it all worked out.
And I can't
So
believe you've got. Sorry, go on.
if anybody's wondering whether to do an MA in creative writing, it was just so brilliantly worthwhile. Expensive, but fantastic as a process in itself. Now I'm not doing it. I miss it. It was just brilliant. I met really brilliant people and got so much feedback on my work. It's a hard process as well. I mean, when you get 10 people giving you feedback each week, I mean, it's just brutal, absolutely brutal. But it is incredibly effective.
I had a short story published in Criminal Shorts, which is the UK Crime Book Club charity anthology. And my friend Leslie Lloyd, who is watching, she did not hold back. She's my favourite person to give things to read. She's absolutely genius. And how some things that I'd written came across in a different way than I'd thought. That's why the feedback's so important. I mean, I was howling, laughing at some of the things we were talking about, that how things had been interpreted. And I can't say that enough. Everybody needs somebody honest to sit and look at their work and kindly tell them the bits that don't work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And feedback which is, oh, this is really good, I really liked it, is not useful at all. You want people to take stuff apart. And yeah, I mean, it's hard. Writing is hard. The
Yeah.
whole thing, everything about it is just hard. But yeah.
How on earth do you manage? When we were talking the other day before we recorded the promo for this, you were saying how you have to keep a third of the day back for the small holding, for the things that could go wrong. The things that crop up that you just weren't expecting on your to-do list that day. And how are you managing to write, have a small holding, have a life? How do you do everything that you do? What is the balance for you?
Well, I don't have a life. In 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 that kind of way. So I mean, the small holding and writing go really, really well together. In fact, I mean, writing fits with a lot of other stuff because if you've got 20 minutes or 4 hours, you can fill it with writing, no problem. So it's a great passion to have. But it does fit extremely well with small holding. So I got into a routine soon after I left the job, and 12 years on, I'm pretty much in exactly the same routine, which is I write for a couple of hours before breakfast. I then go out on the small holding and work that during the day, and then I write for another couple of hours before dinner. So it's this really nice combination of the physical and the cerebral, because a lot of, I mean, most stuff on the small holding is, quite physical and dull, and often cold and wet. So I really like doing it, and get plenty of time to mold my characters and my plots. I always carry a pencil and a piece of paper around in my pocket. But I couldn't do that all day. I'd go mad. I need something to, move my grey matter. And so, my two writing periods fit really well with that. And I feel really lucky that, I found that combination, and works really well for me. Works really well for me and my wife as well. And I mean, I'm very lucky in that, my wife earns the money. There's no money in writing, not unless you're Lee Child or someone like that. So, but it works for her. I mean, she gets to live on a small holding, um, and she works in Manchester and London, and she goes to a lot of quite boring meetings. And when she goes to her
Are
meetings,
you going to get her into
she's got,
trouble saying that?
as she says it herself. But she helps out the weekends. Helps clean out the chickens. We do the bees together. We got the turkeys together. So she has all these great stories to take into her meetings. So yeah, it seems to work for her as well. So, but yeah, no, it is. It's and now I was in the police for 15 years, and I've been doing this for almost as long. And although I wouldn't want to go through what I went through in the police again at the end, I'm I'm very, very glad I did it. The police is an absolutely brilliant career. It's stacked full of really good people, and I'd recommend it to anybody starting out today to consider the police. I thought it was just about the only job to do, and I now feel privileged to have had two careers, because a lot of people only ever have one, and so yeah, it's worked out pretty well.
And you give tours as well. I did ask your permission to mention this because I wasn't sure if you were going to want to tell everyone where you were, but you seem quite open to that.
Yeah, no, so I do small holding tours.
Talk about
So
the sign on the gate as well, because that
yeah,
is just genius.
um, so I live in Hayfield, which is near Glossop in the Peak District, and you can look me up on Airbnb experiences, which, if you don't know, Airbnb have a kind of side wing of experiences. So if you go to Barcelona or whatever, you can do a course in flamenco, or visit local cake shops. If you're staying around us, or even if you're not, you can just book it up anyway. I do something called My Great Big Small Holding Tour, which is an hour and a half, having me touring you around the historic veg garden, our fruit trees. My new passion is fruit trees, apples particularly. I'm naming 100 varieties of apple. I've got 75 at the moment. And then there are the bees and the chickens. So yeah, so I do a bit of that. Um, and on the gate, oh, but yeah, if you come on my small holding tour, you will be expected to buy at least one, if not both, my books. So do come prepared with that sting in the tail. And on that note, I do sell honey and eggs locally. I have a sign on my gate saying eggs, honey, and crime fiction. And I think it's exactly the same thing. If you knock on my door asking for eggs, then I will at the very least send you away with a bookmark, but hopefully one of my books.
which is
I
it's
don't
just such a clever thing.
yeah.
The most unique marketing pitch I've ever
Yeah,
heard. Come and buy honey and
I
eggs.
know.
Come and see my chickens. Come and buy my books.
I know. I did a tweet on Twitter about it, and it did get quite a few retweets, which was quite cool.
It's quite a nice
I hoped it would go
piece of
viral.
slate as well.
Sorry.
It's really nicely written on a piece of slate that's just stuck to the gate as well.
Yeah, my wife wrote that. I think it looks like girls writing, but I think crime fiction should
Is that
have a
is
kind
that a
of
thing?
harder.
Girls writing?
Don't know. Well, okay, my wife's writing. How about that? It's all very curly.
She's got beautiful writing.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why I asked her to
Does
write
that
it.
mean that you've got dreadful handwriting? Is that what you mean?
I know. I mean, I think it's fine, but I have got to the stage in life where I often can't read my own diary and have to ask my wife to read it to me. When you squiggle stuff off.
Malcolm said the book cover stamped on every egg. Maybe you could have egg boxes made with the book covers on them.
Well, it's not a bad idea, and something I have done something like that. So I'm published with Unbound, and they're a hybrid publisher. So the first thing you have to do with each time is pre-sell about 400, 500 copies. And so one of the packages that Unbound did this time with Cold Dawn was a pot of comb honey and a copy of the book. And the comb honey boxes were done by another Derbyshire beekeeper, Graham Roberton. But anyway, he made bespoke labels with Cold Dawn on it for the honey. So they looked really fantastic.
See, now I'm intrigued. Are any of your chickens named? And if so, have you got a Rick Castle? Do you get Rick Castle eggs?
No, the chickens. Well, we've got one rooster. He's called Ben, but no, we don't eat the. We don't name the chickens.
Is that
They're not
because you're a proper farmer and I'm odd?
um, I don't know. When our nieces come and stay, they often name some of the chickens. So maybe some of them do have names. We do. So sometimes we have turkeys. Not this year, but we sometimes have half a dozen turkeys, and we usually name them so that they're easier to dispatch at Christmas time. And the first year we called them Gove and Osborne, as in Michael Gove and George Osborne. I hope they're not listening, but I'm sure they'll take it extremely well. Yeah, maybe they won't take it so well.
I'm not
I just
sure.
want to go back to
Of course.
a theme in the books, which we should definitely mention before we run out of time, and that is so the books are obviously set in Nepal, and one of the themes in them is the building of the
Ah,
football stadiums
in
in
Qatar,
Qatar,
of course.
because a lot of it's well known. There's been a lot. Finally, there's been quite a lot of press about how many people died building those football stadiums.
Mm.
It's in excess of 6,500 people, which works out as something over 62 migrant workers died for every football match played at Qatar, being played in Qatar right now. It's a total scandal. FIFA should be totally embarrassed, and more than that, should be penalised because their standards were so poor. But so anyway, a lot of those migrant workers were from Nepal, and that is one of the themes running through both books. So
And
it
it's
is the perfect time to read them.
yeah. When I was reading it, I had been aware of some things, but not to the extent of it. I feel like it's been quite well hidden.
Yeah, well, I mean, money talks. Money covers over, money distorts, and I mean,
Not an easy topic for any author to cover, and you've covered it in your debut.
yeah, I always remember um, watching an interview with Lee Child and him saying that books should be about something. Even crime fiction, even his books, I think he might have said. Um, and he liked to be able to say for every single one of his books, in one very short sentence, this book is about. So I kind of thought that writing is a complicated thing, but you do it. Another thing I came across, I think on my MA was, you want to give interest in every sentence to the reader. In fact, I think that's something that Joe Stretch said to me. It should be interesting in every sentence, every paragraph, every page for the reader. And I think if the more stuff that you've got going on in your book, the better. So, whether it's about something, but all the storylines as well, the threads, people want to find out the whole time. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And as a writer, it was incredibly complicated to write. I had so many spreadsheets and charts and stuff. Um, but yeah,
Malcolm says you have to rock about, make people think, make people close the book and reflect. What a beautiful way to put that. Yeah.
no, totally agree, Malcolm.
Seeing as we've come back round to Lee Child and Joe, your tutor, um, what advice would you give to somebody who's writing the debut? There's so much advice out there. What did you really find worked for you?
Um, I think um, when you've written the draft, you need to put it away in a drawer for at least a month before you get it out again, and then start again afresh and ask yourself a couple of questions for every chapter. Is it pacey enough? Is there enough tension? Is it driving the plot enough? I think it's always useful to go through a second time and maybe chop out 4,000 or 5,000 words, so the whole thing is much tighter. um, and it makes you really work at every sentence in every chapter. If you have to get rid of just a couple of hundred words from each chapter, it just tightens everything up. Because Nabokov said that when you're reading a book, the first time you read it, you're just getting to know the story. And it's only when you read a book the second time do you really start enjoying it. And it's exactly the same for a writer. That first draft you do, you're just getting the story down on paper. And it's only in subsequent drafts that you're really honing it. It is a long process, but I think pace and tension, which is something my editor Eve Seymour rammed home with both my books. It's her big questions, and because of her asking them, there are much pacier. You want people clamouring to turn the pages.
And we are almost out of time. So, on that note, show the books again and tell people where they can buy them.
So, first one, The Trail. There's a great quote on the front by Paula Hawkins, intelligent and pacey thriller. You might wonder where that came from. I gave her police procedural advice on her on the sequel to Girl on the Train, a book called Into the Water. So if you've got that, I'm on the acknowledgements. So that's the first one, and just hot off the press, Cole's Dawn, which has a quote from Stephen Booth on the front. You can get those online and from on order from every bookshop in the country, and certainly quite a lot of bookshops. Certainly ones in the around the Peak District, Manchester. And if it's not in your local bookshop, ask them why and get them to get in touch with me. We can sort it out.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's commented and asked really lovely questions, insightful questions again. And best of luck with the series. I look forward to seeing where you take it.
Thanks a lot, Sam. Really appreciate it.